All right, we should be back, and with that, we are going to hand it over to Howard Rome.
Thank you, and good afternoon, good morning, wherever folks are. I'm Howard Rome, and Dan Montgomery and I will switch back and forth in this presentation. Dan most recently was up in New York at the annual conference and shared the Toolkit for the first time with many folks. So let's go ahead and get started. We like to show this quote from Stephen Covey because it really summarized. We have found working with well over 200 60 countries now, and seems to get right to the point that folks are so busy doing the right things that they hardly have time to decide doing things right, that they hardly have time to decide if they're doing these. Things done right is about efficiency and productivity, and do I work hard, and do I get things done? The doing the right things is about strategy. So we're going to go into some difference about strategy and operations. Again, operations are the programs, the services, the projects, the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, and it's important that those be done efficiently. But we're going to take a half step back, too, and ask ourselves, are we working on the right things? And that's the strategy question. I'll just march through here. Improving Performance, Scoring Success is the title of the briefing. I came in a little late. I'm sorry, I had some technical problems. I think I heard you introduce me. Have you also introduced Stan?
We did, yep.
Okay, very good. We know who we are. There's three major takeaways from presentation, and I'm going to pass this over to Dan. Talk about those. So Dan, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Howard. So we want to make three big points, kind of make those up front, and hopefully build that as we go along. Questions as well all along the way. So the first point that we want to make, the first sentence here is really pretty obvious, that strategic planning and management are more important than ever to community action agencies in the times that we're in, and we'll talk about why that's true, very little of which is going to be a surprise to any of you out there. But the key point we want to make is that to do strategic planning right, you need to link the high-level vision you've got to the action. So we'll introduce the concept of altitude, the idea that vision is something that is a high-altitude idea, but you've really got to bring it down to the ground in terms of your initiatives and your programs, and have the ability to measure those outcomes in order to justify the funding that you receive. The second takeaway is the idea, what we're calling the ROMA Balanced Scorecard Framework, which is really a kind of an elaboration of the ROMA model that's been out there for a few years. Adding the Balanced Scorecard element in aligns your mission and vision with strategy and with effective programs. And often folks think that the Balanced Scorecard is simply a report card, and that is something that's implied by that name. But in fact, what it is, it's an integrated system that puts together your strategic planning process, the way you do program management, your outcome measures, change management, and budgeting. And we'll show you a few high points of that today in terms of what's in the toolkit, and certainly invite you to download that from the website. We'll show you where that is, and invite you to take a look through the whole document. It's a 100-page or so document. Third takeaway, this is the toolkit. This is the name of the toolkit, and again, we'll show you how to get your hands on that. So the reality that we're in these days is there are some long-term structural changes happening in the economy. We fully expect we're going to see higher energy costs and higher food costs, which, as you well know, hit low-income people disproportionately. At the same time, there are a lot of structural issues in the economy that are leading to high unemployment and high underemployment. It may take us a long time to get back to the levels of employment we had just a few years ago. So while there's a greater need than ever, We're seeing reduced government funding for services. We're seeing a lot of polarization in the political sphere about what the role of government should be with regard to helping low-income people out. So what that's doing is creating a much higher level of competition among agencies for a reduced pool of funding, which has to do with the demand for measurable results. In order to compete adequately for these funds, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're having an impact on outcomes, and that's where we hope this system will be useful for you. So the response on the part of community action agencies, you need to think more strategically, you need to think more entrepreneurially, and you need to think more accountably. And accountability is where we start talking about impact analysis and reporting. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned about strategic planning in the realm of community action agencies. But first, I think Cashin has some questions for you, and we'd like to hear what you have to say about those. Cashin?
Sure. We have opened up a poll in the right-hand column. There are a couple of questions, and we've given you 2 to 3 minutes to work on those. So if you could take a look at those. We have several of you putting answers in, so we will close this in just a moment. So go ahead and get those last-ditch answers in. All right, I've displayed the results, so go ahead and analyze away.
Okay, will you be leaving these up for a few minutes, Cashin?
We will leave the results up.
Okay, so it looks like 60% have a strategic plan. A lot of folks didn't answer that, and that may be some discussion about what a strategic plan is, which we'll talk about in a minute. So is it linked to, I think the first question, Cashin, was that, is it linked to
the first
programming
one is budgeting process.
Budgeting
process.
Is first. So that's about evenly divided between the yeses, the nos, and the independents. Is it linked to programming? Yes, on the part of half. That's great. And then it's a good result. 35% are using ROMA as both a strategic planning tool and part of a strategic planning process. Okay, well, let's go on from there. We, a couple of years ago, we were working with CAP San Bernardino out in California, and one of our colleagues did a review of 20 community action agency strategic plans that were available on the internet. And the results were really interesting, because what we found is almost all of the strategic plans will talk about mission, and they will talk about vision. So that's a very common thing. Any facilitator who would come in and build a strategic plan would typically have you do that. But a lot of them missed a lot of the things that we consider the important things in the middle of it. The way that we look at it, mission and vision are kind of the high altitude things that describe the big picture of what you're doing. The strategic initiatives describe the actions that you're taking. And often what happens in strategic planning, we have a tendency to jump from defining a problem to saying, okay, this is our vision of where we want to go. What are we going to do about it? Don't just sit there, do something. The approach that we're going to advocate has you take a little bit more time in the middle to define really what the objectives are, what does that look in more detail, and to define what we call strategic performance measures or outcome indicators that are going to tell you if you're on track. A lot of the strategic plans we looked at would be either or. They would either be a page or two of very high-level language, or they would be something that amounted to to-do list. So we'll show you what we mean by an integrated strategic planning and strategy management system, which really integrates both of them. So Howard, over to you.
Move the pointer also, or move the ball. There we go. Got it. Okay, thanks. So what is a ROMA Balanced Scorecard? It combines two frameworks, the ROMA framework and the Balanced Scorecard framework. It is a planning and management system that is integrated. What that means is that you don't have to do strategic as a separate exercise. It's part and parcel of the way you think about program, think about budgeting, the way you think about operations of your agency. The big advantage of the Balanced Scorecard, and boy, out of these frameworks over the years, my experience goes back well years, and I can remember somebody did a count once and came over 100 planning and management systems, and I'm going to tell you that I've worked on about 30 of them over the course of my. The big advantage of the Balanced Scorecard is that it for us to think in a disciplined way about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. If you go back to the Covey quote, trying to figure out things to do are. It's very disciplined, and it helps that conversation along, and that's really the big advantage of it. For one thing, it's a communications tool. A strategy map is one of those of a Balanced Scorecard system, and we'll show you what that is in a minute. But a visual way of communicating an agency's vision and strategy, so that employees get it, so that stakeholders get it, so that funders get it. It really does make a difference in communications. It also gives us the ability to align day-to-day work to vision and strategy. A lot of the management systems that have been used over the years, they, as Dan was saying, suggest that you just take the programs that you're working on and put them into goal buckets and call that the strategic plan. You have to ask yourself, really, do we have any strategy in our strategic plan? And we wrote an article on that a couple of years back. But the idea is I want to be able to have line of sight between the picture of the future, my vision, and the mission of the agency. Strategy is, in other words, how am I going to implement the vision and the mission? The Balanced Scorecard gives us a framework for prioritizing. There are several different ways that we can come up with prioritization works, but basically it gives us a way of leveling the playing field. So we have the discussion around budget and around program outcomes, breaking out some of the variables from that process that tend to get in the way, sort of having an honest broker discussion over whether or not the particular program or service is really producing what you want it to produce. And finally, we use strategic performance measures and targets to measure progress. There's different kinds of performance measures, and we're going to get into that later. Most organizations have lots of op measures. Number one, it's easy. We know how to count outputs. We're pretty familiar with that. We know how to count budget dollars and FTEs. Strategic performance measures are harder. And saying it's that sort of middle ground where we want to link the work on a day-to-day basis with the agency's vision and then a way to measure and track performance against that vision. Let's see if I can move the slide here.
Okay, thanks, Howard. Let's see, can you throw it back over to me?
Right now, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So the toolkit, what we're going to do here is just give you kind of a high-level flyby of the steps in the toolkit. As was mentioned earlier on, the Balanced Scorecard Institute has a 9-step process for building one of these Balanced Scorecard frameworks, but in talking with Denise and the folks at CAP, what we agreed to do was to actually take the ROMA cycle, which is something a lot of you are already familiar with, and to really just build on that. So what we've done is put this into a 5-step framework here, using the 5 steps of assessment, planning, implementation, measuring the achievement of results, and then evaluating the whole program. So we're going to take you through each one of those 5 steps here. So the first one is assessment. I always love quoting Mark Twain. He's just a lot of homespun wisdom. Because the whole point of assessment is to go through a discovery process and ideally find out
Dan, I think we lost your audio. Are you still there?
I think we did also. There, he's back.
Hello?
Dan? Yeah.
There you are, Dan. Okay, we lost you there for a moment.
Okay, what was the last pithy thing that I said there, folks?
Assessment, I think. You hadn't gotten very far in.
Okay,
you were starting to wax eloquently about your friend Mark Twain.
Yes, yeah, Mark and I go way back. So the point I was trying to make about this quote, thank you, is that assessment is very important because we often go into one of these planning processes assuming that we know what the environment is, that what was true yesterday is true today and will be true tomorrow, and often that's not the case. So we recommend 3 steps in this process. And the rest of you, let me know if you lose me here, okay, with the audio. So the first step is stakeholder analysis, understanding who your stakeholders are. Now in this case, we've created a hypothetical community action agency called the Mayberry Community Action Agency because our headquarters is in North Carolina. And so the Mayberry Community Action Agency goes through a process of identifying who are the key groups or individuals that the agency impacts and that in turn have an impact on the agency. So this can include folks like who are the funders, who are the delivery partners, who are the beneficiaries of all of this. So it's important to involve as many stakeholders as possible in the assessment process, and then what we go into is a discovery process which looks kind of like feeding all this information into the hopper. Now, there's a lot of good material in the ROMA training, and I hope most of you have had the ROMA training, and if not, I'd really encourage it. There's a lot of really good material in there on community needs assessment. So we don't really add a lot to that here. We add some of these other elements like looking at stakeholders and then using the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, or SWOT matrix as a way to bucket what you find out in this discovery process. So that's what assessment's about. What I'm going to do now is turn it back over to Howard because we have a lot of material here that's very specific to this balanced scorecard methodology that has to do with how you go about actually planning your strategy. So Howard, over to you. I'll try and throw you the ball here if I can manage that. Here we go.
Very good. Thank you, Dan.
You bet.
My friend Michael Porter, I'll use that quote to make the point that it's hard to say You know, when you're dealing with strategy, there's an awful lot of things that we would like to be able to, and it's really hard to say no. And yet, that's the coming up with a few good strategies that that are meaningful. Let's see, I'm having some trouble getting my to build here. It should pop up in
just
a
little right arrow there.
Say again, Dan, please.
No, you don't just click it like you would with PowerPoint. You've got to hit that arrow to the right where it says Step 2, Plan Your Strategy, up above the slide. There you go.
It was working with the off the keyboard for a while, so this is better though. One of the important parts of developing a methodology is to take the outcomes from that assessment step, anything that we call a value proposition. In other words, we ask ourselves who are our members and what do they need from us. And the emphasis is we have to start with wants, but then we have to get down to needs, which we are capable of providing as an aid. And the value proposition has three major parts. What are the use of the products or services that we're delivering to folks? What image do we want in the community? And finally, what kind of a relation we want with our stakeholders? It's really a way of framing the discussion. But, number one, our primary stakeholders and our secondary stakeholders, and some grouping, but also looking at a point of view of these attributes of service and programs that are important. So, again, part of this discipline framework. Funds and sponsors are a different stakeholder. My voice, I'm getting over one of the disadvantages of living in North Carolina is that you go through 2 seasons, and everything else is wonderful about North Carolina, but those 2 darn seasons seem to catch up with me once in a while. Employees are stakeholders also, employees of the agencies, the volunteers also. One of the meta views for building strategy is the idea of a custom house. And what we look for are strategic focus areas. These are the load-bearing walls that we're building. In the Balanced Scorecard language, we'll call perspectives, which are the different lenses we're going to look at to define our strategy. So in this case, we have stakeholders in the top position here. We have financial stewardship, internal processes, and then finally the capacity of agency to deliver programs and services. So what this tells us to think of strategy not in one great big hard to swallow lump, but to break it down into components that we can actually work on. The foundation of this house that we're building, engaged leadership, interactive, it's two-way communication, excuse me, and core values. So we're going to put pieces of this custom house and put them in the right place, much like bring the right tools and the right components at the right time to build the house. So let's take a look at those 4 perspectives again and ask ourselves some key questions, and then identify that will tell us whether we're making progress. Quite a client or the stakeholder point of view is how we meet the needs of our clients. And I think I'm going to back over to you and let me catch my breath here with the start cold.
Throw it back to me there. All right. So the idea with these perspectives is that each one of them is a lens through which to look at the agency. So I'm sure a lot of you have been involved in, for example, a senior management meeting or a board meeting. You may find that, Certain people are very focused on what the outcomes are, what the experience is for your client. Some people may be very concerned with other stakeholders. You get certain folks who are really paying attention to the dollars, and that's their view of reality. Other folks, you'll often get someone from the HR department that's really focused on, well, do we have the skills to do the job? Do we have the right culture? And people who are very focused on the operations. Are we doing what we need to do efficiently? So the idea of these perspectives is it's saying, you know, no one of those views is the whole story. They're all right, but organizational performance depends on integrating all four of these perspectives. So, in fact, a balanced scorecard answers questions for each one of those perspectives. So we already see up here we've got the client and stakeholder question. How well are we meeting their needs? If you look at finance, how are we maximizing the value of the resources that we're given in order to help our clients and make the appeal to funders that we're making a good.
Hi, Dane. It sounds like we lost you again on your audio.
Okay.
Oh, I heard that part, though. Dan, are you still with us?
Let me try and take over until Dan comes back.
Thank you, Howard.
Cashin. Let me, well, I can't, there we go, okay. So the key measures that we're interested in are the costs of the programs and the services, what value do we have diversity in our funding so that not all the money is coming from one place. On the internal process, it's the differences. It's how can we improve those processes to deliver just better, faster, and cheaper. So the kinds of strategic measures in our efficiency of our processes, the quality and this of our programs. Excuse me. Dan, are you back? I have to apologize.
Looks like Dan is dialing back in.
Oh yes, okay. All right. I'll keep going then. Okay. On the fourth perspective, it's organizational capacity. And this is about aligning skills and culture and staff and understanding the dynamics of changing client needs. And what tools and technology do we need to maximize and to demonstrate the impact making in a local community. So, you know, this isn't governance. It's about people, employees, volunteers. It's about the tools and technology that we use to get our work done. It's about innovating, coming up with new ideas for programs and services, and you know, changing hearts and minds. It's the culture part of the framework.
Am I back? Can you all hear me?
You're back.
Yeah,
You are.
you're back.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'll give you the ball.
Whenever you want me. You give me the ball back.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and do that now.
Okay. Great. Sorry for the phone problems, folks. So as Howard was saying, I mean, essentially what we're showing here is that organizational capacity, improved organizational capacity, gives us the people and the tools in order to do the job described in internal process. That's the actual work that we're doing, to work cost effectively, to then produce the client and stakeholder results. And in a couple of minutes, we'll show you how that translates into what we call a strategy map. So back to this issue we were talking about earlier, the problem with a lot of strategic plans is they will often tend to be one or the other of these. They're very high level mission type language, which can have the problem that it's not really actionable. It doesn't really tell us what to do. It's very poetic sounding words on the wall, but when Joe comes in on Tuesday working with a caseload, how does that actually affect the way that he works? The other extreme with strategic plans is to be very focused on action and initiatives. So our strategic plan is we're going to build a new information system, we're going to train staff, and we're going to deliver these new services. That's too narrowly defined. That's too operationally. I just want to double check. Am I breaking up at all, or am I clear now?
You're fine.
Great, thanks. So the problem with that is those are short-term things with a beginning and an end. That's where the rubber meets the road, but if you don't have them aligned with the high-level strategy, you may end up losing the forest for the trees. So what we do is create work in the middle altitude where we do what we call strategic objectives. Strategic objectives are the real building blocks or the DNA of strategy. So these are continuous improvement objectives that tell a story that supports the achievement of the vision, but at the same time, then we can hang the initiatives and actions and programs off of that. And I'll show you some examples here. So this is a strategy map. I apologize for the arrows. They're not supposed to be kind of going off waywardly the way they are, so let's fix a couple of those. So diversifying funding, that's supposed to be going this way. And I think that's the big one that's really messed up, and then this one's just going in the wrong direction. So you'll notice there's a flow upward as we talked about. So this is telling us a story. This is telling us if we invest in our staff's knowledge, skills, and abilities and take steps to remove some barriers to employee motivation that we've identified, that's going to enable us to improve a number of our processes, such as partnering, which putting all those together allows us to do a better job of program development, resulting in better service quality. The other factor that's going to contribute to this improved program development and service quality is better use of technology. What we're going to be doing with this technology, for example, might be doing a better job of tracking clients. So we've got one view of a client across all of our programs and have a better ability to match them with resources and measure results through these better programs. Because we're doing a better job of partnering, we're able to diversify our funding. We're making alliances with different community partners, both for funding, for in-kind services, for service delivery, all of those kinds of things, so it broadens the range of what we can do. Improving the partnering also helps us improve advocacy in the local community. Improving the service quality allows us to do a better job of improving cost effectiveness, which in turn influences our appeal to funders. And you put all of this together, the improved advocacy, the improved family outcomes, again, that just goes up. Both of those things together give us the ability to improve community outcomes. So it's just one point that I'll make about the change management aspect of this is that it's very important to develop one of these with a group of people. We really emphasize a very collaborative process that involves as many stakeholders as possible and as many members of the organization as possible. So this is really developed as a collaborative kind of narrative. You want to have the ability for anyone in the organization to be able to look at this kind of a one-page diagram and really tell the story about what you're about, so that the result being, if I'm someone in the IT department in the agency, I understand how what I'm doing is contributing to better client and community outcomes. So then what happens, I mentioned the idea that you take each one of these objectives and you attach performance measures to those. So instead of doing what often happens where we have a set, we've got the ROMA NPIs and we've got to pick some of those and respond to them in order to satisfy our funder, Of course, you're still going to have to do that, but what this allows us to do is pick and choose which indicators we're going to use in a way that's more strategically relevant for our local situation. Because we've developed strategic objectives that fit our situation and then match the indicators to those rather than doing it the other way around. Similarly, we can define new initiatives in a way that are closely related to the objectives, so that that gives us a framework for prioritizing the initiatives that makes more sense than it being a matter of what Howard loves to call argument by vigorous assertion or politics or something else like that. So that's the idea of how all of these fit together. And again, we go into a lot of detail about how to do this in the toolkit. So moving on here, this is just a diagram that shows you how you can tie ROMA into this particular strategy map. So this is the hypothetical strategy map that the Mayberry Agency came up with, and you can see what we've done is link these specific objectives to the ROMA goals. So improving advocacy has to do with goal 3, owning a stake in their community. We've involved the clients in advocacy in that case. So you can see there's a one-on-one relationship here, which becomes very useful once we start drilling down to how we do our programs. We also talk about pathways to excellence. So pathways to excellence, for those of you who've been involved in it, is a great way. It's something you can do at the assessment stage, and it's also something that you can do at the evaluation stage to see how you're doing. So what we've done is link the pathways standards of excellence, of which there are 7. We have linked those into these different objectives. So what the Mayberry Agency is doing here is drawing an explicit link between their own customized strategic plan and the ROMA reporting that they're going to be doing anyway, and the Pathways program that they want to participate in. Why don't we see, Cashin, do we have some questions that we can take right now?
We do. We have a couple of questions that came in, and this looks like a good time before we start into step 3. So first off, how broad do you recommend going with stakeholder analysis? CAA stakeholders are broad, and it seems to get overwhelming.
Good question. Yes, there are probably an infinite number of stakeholders, so I think that's where the art comes in. You really have to make a call about who are the ones who are really most significant for us. I mean, obviously your primary clients are important, your primary funders are very important, and any folks that you're really relying on as suppliers of services. So for instance, if you've got an alliance with a faith-based group that's delivering your Meals on Wheels program, they're a very important stakeholder. I mean, the second decision that you want to make is how much do you want to get them involved? So what we've done in some cases, it may be as simple as inviting certain categories of stakeholders like delivery partners to a 2-hour focus group, which you can facilitate or have a consultant facilitate and go through a structured series of questions and ask them, well, you know, how are we doing? How could we do better? What ideas do you have? What needs do you see that are not being met? And those kinds of things. And those are often extremely productive because folks really appreciate being asked those questions. Howard, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, let me add one thought. The when we talk about primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders, tertiary stakeholders, we're really asking the question from an influence point of view. You know, who can help us succeed the most? You know, that's a primary stakeholder. Also a primary stakeholder would be somebody who could help us not succeed, could stand in the way. So you have to take that into consideration on both sides of the equation, so to speak. Who has influence? Predominant, significant, strong influence on the outcome of my programs, on my success. That's it, Jim.
Okay. Any other questions for now, Cashin?
We do. We have another one that asked if they wanted someone from the Balanced Scorecard Institute to consult with their CAA to develop a balanced scorecard. Is that something you would be able to do, and what would the ballpark cost be?
Okay. Howard, do you want me to jump in on that one?
Well, let me make a point. We're trying to come up with a arrangement where we might hold some regional or statewide workshops to help people build these systems if there's enough interest in that, sort of the equivalent of the cohort program. So that would be one option. Get several camps together and then focus just on building a CAP Balanced Scorecard system. The other option would be single consulting, and we can either do that on site, or we also do that via webinar with limited on site. So you know, the costs range from I suppose $10,000 to $120,000, depending on how much effort is required for a large, and CAPs do not get this large, I don't believe. You know, if we look at 100 or 200 employees, you know, that's a mid-size or organization to us. And if they want to go with a complete Tier 1 scorecard system, you know, that's in $40,000 to $60,000, $70,000 range to build one of these. It takes about 2 to 3 months. But what we find is that a lot of organizations have a lot of these pieces already built. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the backup slides, Dan, is something called a gap analysis. And so the price really depends on how much you've already done, and can we use that and take advantage of it already, and then just fill in whatever missing pieces there are to, you know, to make a whole loaf. So that's really the way to look at this. Do that inventory, and figure out what else needs to be done. Cohort program, we haven't put a price on it yet, but it's definitely going to be a lower price offering to get as many folks to take advantage of this system as we can. Dan?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I would say there's a range of services within what Howard was talking about, because often what we do, it depends on how much of this is kind of a do-it-yourself facilitation versus bringing in some folks like us who, you know, we're experts in the process. We're not experts in your organization, but we've got a very structured way to get you through all of this pretty quickly and pretty efficiently. So we can do things like customized training for a group of you, for instance, in a region, as Howard was talking about. We can do individual coaching. We can come in and facilitate some or all of the process. And we would really love to hear from you if this is something that you're interested in, particularly the cohort program that Howard mentioned. We'd love to partner with the partnership and find a way to deliver that cost effectively to folks. Any other, is that it for questions?
That's it for now, though of course this does serve as a reminder point that you can put in your questions into the Q&A box at any time.
Okay, well, let's jump into step 3 here. Let's step through this pretty quickly. There's some really key points here where the rubber really meets the road, as we say. So there's never any lack of bright ideas about what we could be doing differently, but often we're lacking the resources. So what we show you in the toolkit is a way to take the strategic plan with the scorecard and the strategic objectives and the measures and use that as a way to prioritize the kinds of programs, services, and strategic initiatives that actually move the needle on the measures, that actually move you forward. So I'll just show you one example of the kinds of things we do. So, for instance, what we've done in this hypothetical agency is we've said there are 3 major themes, if you remember the house diagram that Howard showed you a little while ago. There were 3 main ones, and we've divided that into families, community, and agency. There's a neat fit with the goals that way. So what you can see from this slide is that we're able to group the different kinds of programs we have into these specific themes. This is what we call a crosswalk. So if you're not able to make the link between one of your big themes and a program, you need to question why you're moving forward with that. Howard, do you have any other comments on this one?
I'll just share a story about this. We helped the city of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. Charlotte is the seat, build a balanced scorecard system for their county. And one of the things they did after the scorecard was built was look for ways to improve the budget formulation process. And the way they ended up doing is, instead of giving the county commission a 3-ring binder that was about 6 or 8 inches thick, they said, why don't we make an allocation and group our programs or service projects into our major strategic themes. They had 4, not 3. They're a little different than these, and of course that reflects the uniqueness of each community agency. You can't just take, I'll share something with you, you can't just take somebody else's CAP strategy map or CAP themes and say, yeah, let's just go ahead and use those and see if we can't save some time and some money, because this really reflects the unique people that you have as well as the structure of the organization that you're using. So anyway, when the county commissioners got the budget the next year, it was organized by 4 themes. And it really changed the nature of the discussion, because one of the programmatic area was healthcare, and they were able to put those programs and services, and you have to make some assumptions about your indirect costs, your program direction account, and your overhead, your G&A, and so on. You have to make some allocation assumptions, much like you would in an activity-based costing kind of a system, which is a lot more complicated than this. But it really got the discussion going around, well, now within this theme, we can start to make hard choices, because we can put a budget bogey number out there, and we can say, okay, which of the programs do we have? Should we use, and what priority should we put them in? It also gives you the ability to balance across the themes, and that's really important. People say, well, what does a balanced scorecard mean? Well, it means an allocation between internal efforts and external efforts. And it means balancing the work that you do across these different strategy areas, or strategic themes, we like to call them. It means balancing between the strategic and the operational, and all of these things force a discussion with the smart people in the room on, can we do things better? Can we improve the quality? Can we improve the timeliness? Can we improve the cost effectiveness of what we're delivering? And this is one way of doing that, and that was very effective at literally changing hearts and minds on how to look at a budget process. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. So this is another view. Do you want to continue?
Yeah, let me just refresh this a little bit. There's our custom-built house with up here mission and vision and client and community needs. Right up here, that's the high altitude things that Dan talked about. Perspectives are the floors of the house. The themes are the load-bearing walls. The foundation of the house. What's important here is engaged leadership. Do not just give this for somebody to build for you, a system like this. This system works because leadership and the different voices in the organization are engaged in the process of building it and then taking ownership after it's built. One of the mistakes we see people make is trying to do it the old-fashioned way, where we give it to the strategic planning office and say, go build me one of these, this looks pretty cool. It doesn't work, because the strategic planning office is vested in it, but the rest of the agency and its employees and its stakeholders aren't as vested in it. And it becomes little more than a reporting tool, to check mark next to somebody who says, do we have a strategic plan? You bet we do. Just check that one off. So if you treat this seriously, you're going to get a lot of good stuff out of it. It's just amazing. The light bulb goes off for people when they're part of this process. And you don't know who it's going to happen to, and you don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But it's really amazing to see with these workshops when people get it. And what happens, this system becomes institutionalized when 2 things happen. One, there's a need for the organization that is clear and visible, and people get it. And the second is when people internalize this and say, this is going to help me do my job better. When those two things happen, then people stop talking about the balanced scorecard and just start talking about the way we do business around here. It literally becomes integral to the way the agency functions. I'm down at the bottom. I just expand programs and services to allocate them to those three strategic themes and include the program direction, overhead, and G&A expenses on some allocated basis. Could be as simple as dividing that budget line item by 3, or maybe come up with some other allocation scheme. Over on the right-hand side are what Dan talked very early about, strategic initiatives. Remember, the strategic initiatives are tied to strategic objectives. Right? And the reason we do that is because we're going to identify performance gaps in the objectives. Remember, they're continuous improvement activities that we want to get better on as time goes on. So we're going to look at them, and then we're going to do a baseline for a performance measure within an objective, and then we're going to start looking at things we can do to move the needle. And that's where strategic initiatives come in. Could they be a program or a service that you're already funding? Yes, they could. A lot of times, though, here's where new ideas will come from that affect the enterprise as a whole. New funding sources, new management systems, new focus groups, the kinds of things that are going to really move the needle on strategy. Dan?
Okay, thanks, Howard. Want to just, if you'll notice the lower right corner of the previous slide, we had the idea of a performance budget. So this is what this looks like. This is an idea that we've adapted to the public sector that is starting to take hold in the corporate world. The idea that, traditionally in accounting, you have the idea you've got capital dollars, which are amortized over a period of time, and then you've got operating dollars, which are used in the current accounting period. So what we're proposing is that there's a third bucket in which to look at how you're spending money, which is what we call strategic expenditure, or STRATEX. Now, we're not talking about changing your accounting system. What we're talking about, this is a view into your accounting system that we talk about in the toolkit, because if you say, all right, we're going to devote 20% of the time in our IT department in the next year to the implementation of this new system, well, some of your salary dollars are going into that new system. You're presumably spending some money on new equipment. You're spending some money on software. That may be capital or that may be operating, depending on how it's set up. But what we want to do is call that out so that we can see how much money are we spending on these strategic initiatives as opposed to the money that we're spending on what we might term business as usual. I just started getting an echo, Cashin. Oh, that just stopped. Good. So that's the idea of strategic budgeting, which we get into in the toolkit, and how you apply that to program evaluation. So I want to come back to the idea then, once you've designed this whole thing, how you go about communicating it is really important. And one of the great things about the Balanced Scorecard system is that you can summarize your strategic plan on one piece of paper. And a lot of our clients have created something like this, which we call a poster, that includes, here's the strategy map on the left, and this basically fills it out. So you can see, if we're talking about improving family outcomes, we see what the indicators are, what the targets are, and what the initiatives are connected with it. Down in finance, we have an objective to diversify funding. We're going to measure the percentage of our revenues that are unrestricted funds, and we're looking to increase that over 20%. We have an initiative that lines up with that called funder cultivation, which has its own deliverables, its own timeline, its own resourcing, and all of that kind of thing. This is what really helps, everybody that comes in and walks into their office or cubicle every day, or they're out making calls on clients, helps everybody understand how they fit into the whole picture, why we're doing what we're doing. So this is, we found to be a very important communication tool here. Now I'm going to probably need to skip a few slides. It looks like we've only got about 10 minutes left. If any of you has any further questions, please send those in, and we'll just hit a few of the high points from some of the other slides. Howard has unfortunately, he is at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and he has had to leave us, so I will just take it from here and answer any questions that you've got, and thanks for joining us, Howard. I was glad we were able to get him involved in this. So I'll just hit a few high points of the rest of it. You've got, if you've got your handouts and have some questions about something I haven't covered, I will leave a few minutes at the end to do this. So step 4 in the ROMA cycle is called achievement of results. So this has to do with measurement and performance analytics. And the key point I want to make right here is a lot of the time we may think the only reason we're measuring results is because of compliance or evaluation. Someone is demanding data from us in exchange for funding. They're obviously a very important stakeholder, so we're going to do that. But what we're suggesting is running a little faster and getting ahead of that. So get out of react mode and actually use those measures for your own purposes as well as the reporting. There's a lot of different things you can do with them, like using measures as a learning tool. Again, this is really a very powerful change management approach because you use measures as a way to have different kinds of conversations about what you're doing that are strategically focused, and it's an organizational learning tool. You can also use those measures to promote yourselves. You use them for advocacy in the community. You use them for a continuous process of improvement. This approach completely dovetails with those Lean and Six Sigma approaches that are starting to get more and more popular in human services. We see a huge amount of it happening in healthcare. And let's see, I am going to just skip ahead a little bit here. So what do you do with measures? What we suggest is that, you know, it isn't a matter of just collecting data. It's what you do with the data. How do you turn the data into knowledge? That's a collaborative process in your agency that involves agreeing up front what success looks like. Have that conversation up front. The conversation alone is worth it. Then you begin collecting data and starting to shift the agendas in your meetings to say, well, okay, what does this tell us? What does this actually mean? Oops. Back up there. We talk a bit about automation. There are a number of relatively inexpensive tools for automating performance information. So you can see this is one that is based on the Mayberry case example. You've got underlying measures behind each one of these objectives. So you can see diversified funding is showing up in red. So behind that might be a measure having to do with the percentage of unrestricted funds we're working with or the number of funding sources that we've got. Let's say that we've weighted each of those 50%. We've set targets, and then that's going to read the data and tell us that that's red. So the influence of this on a senior management meeting or a board meeting cannot be underestimated, because what this does is get us out of kind of endless reporting about everything that's going on and getting us focused on the exceptions that are detracting from us achieving our strategy. So the whole point of it is becoming more strategically focused, because a lot of times what happens is we spend a lot of time in meetings. If you look at the bottom two here, this is based on some degree of research and some degree of my personal experience. You spend a lot of time in a meeting being presented with data that you haven't seen before and trying to figure out what does that mean? Do I believe that? Does that make sense? So rather than do that, agree on the measures up front. And then you can do something that looks more like this. You can spend more of your meeting time, which is very expensive time, talking about strategic process and issues. So again, why this is a big change management tool? It's about organizational learning. It's about shifting the agenda. It's about having management conversations and conversations throughout the organization that are really based on strategic thinking, as opposed to being quite so focused on operations. I'll just say a little bit about evaluation here. This is an example, and this is taken from a lot of the work Fred Richmond has done at the Center for Applied Management Practices. We were very impressed with that, and with his permission, put some of this material in here. The point being, often we talk about how much money we spend, and we might talk about what some of the benefits were, but it's often anecdotal. So what we're advocating is the kind of public reporting that you do, the kind of information that you put on your website should be a subset of the information that you're deriving from your balanced scorecard. So this is a great example of lining up ROMA goals all the way down to some very detailed financial information. Let's say we've got a program, it's an employment training program. It feeds into goal 1, which is one of our, in our family theme, low-income people become more self-sufficient. We're very specific about how we're going to measure the outcomes of that, which is that participants in the program will obtain a living wage job within 60 days after completing the program. We've spent $100,000 on it. And so we make a distinction here between what is the program cost per service and what's the program cost per outcome. There are a lot of intervening variables. So you can see we've got 50 people participating in the program, so we're spending $2,000 per participant. But the really interesting number here is essentially what did it cost for us to help a participant, a low-income person, get a job? And it cost $4,000. And you can take this further and get into, well, what are the benefits back to the community? If that person gets off unemployment, gets off welfare, paying taxes, making a contribution back to the community, you can start to see how the math adds up, and you can tell a very specific story that spending $4,000 on this turns out to be a really good deal by anybody's assessment. So I'm just going to leave it with a couple more slides here, and then we'll just see if we have any questions at the end. If you want to find the toolkit, go to the Community Action Partnership website. You can see the resources there. That will take you another page that's got the toolkit and some other toolkits and some other resources that Denise and those folks have put together. So that's where you find it. It's a downloadable PDF, and what it gives you, you can read through, you can read the Mayberry example so you can see what's been done, and then what we do in the appendix is give you a set of blank forms that you can take and copy out and use if you want to go step by step through this process. We're also, as Howard talked about, very keen to engage in a conversation with you about how we can design a cost-effective way to bring this kind of planning technology to you in a way that's affordable. So we like the idea of creating some kind of a peer learning group so you can learn from each other and from us, and we think that could be a very positive thing going forward. So we'd love to have more conversations about that later. This is some information about us. If you're interested in finding out about our courses, I should mention we also offer public courses, usually 1 or 2 a month, generally once a month in the Washington, D.C. area, along with somewhere else in the country. So we've got a course going on right now in Alexandria, Virginia. We'll be doing one in San Francisco in October. We've got them going different places, and you can see the schedule there. So with that, I just want to also mention the idea not to think of this as a project. It's not a sprint. It's really a marathon. As Howard said, this is changing the way that you think about linking community needs with strategic planning, with action, with evaluation. So it really becomes an entire ongoing management system. So with that, I have yacked long enough. I'd like to just see if we have any other questions, Cashin, or we wrap it up at this point.
Hi, Dan. Yeah, this is Denise. It doesn't look like we have any other questions that have been submitted, so we're going to go ahead and pop up an evaluation survey for today's webinar. We ask folks to just take a moment. And I appreciate you mentioning the idea for a peer learning group or a cohort of some sort to look to see are there ways that we can leverage this toolkit with your model and perhaps with the resources with a number of CAPs who might be interested in pursuing this model. I would ask any community action agencies out there who may be interested in pursuing that line of thought, shoot me an email at dharlow, D-H-A-R-L-O-W, at communityactionpartnership.com. My email is also up on the partnership's website. And maybe, Dan, we can get together if we have a few folks who are interested in pursuing that continued dialogue and conversation and pull a conference call together.
We'd love to.
All right, with that, then we do have more webinars happening this week and next, as does CAPLA. There's a lot of things going on in the next 2 weeks as your T&TA providers wrap up a federal fiscal year. So tomorrow we have a webinar on the Nonprofit Risk Management Center and their new online risk assessment tool. We have a piece with Whipsley on Thursday around personnel activity reports. We have a piece next week in partnership with CAPLA on cost allocation on Thursday, and on Monday actually we're working with transition guides and sustainability planning. So a lot going on. Check us out at communityactionpartnership.com. Thanks, Dan and Howard, for a great presentation today, and folks, will be in touch. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Denise. Bye, everybody.